Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Actual Conversations. My guest today is the founder and CEO of Young Americans Against Socialism, Morgan Zegers. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you for having me on.
The pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much for coming on. So I want to kind of preface this with kind of the origin story. I think in my original email when I sent to you, I had a socialist on, essentially. We had a representative from the Socialist Party of Great Britain come on to really dive in and I wanted to explore his mind and their ideas and everything. And I thought it was a pretty productive conversation. It was pretty well received by both sides. Obviously I wasn't really convinced. I still have some serious issues that I have with the ideas and kind of how they present them and all sorts of things. But I thought it would be fun to have a counter podcast on it. And we've kind of brought it up. My audience is aware that we bring this subject up every now and then in the context of other conversations. But I thought it would be productive to have a podcast specifically on it. And who better to have than the founder of the Young Americans Against Socialism on here. So I want to thank you again just for coming on to discuss this with me.
Of course, and I really appreciate that you have people with different perspectives on, and something that I talk about a lot, and we can get further into this in the later conversation, is just deciding who the real enemy is in the fight against socialism. I don't think it's the young people that are my age that think they want a socialist takeover in America. I think it's the small group of actually true radical people that want to structurally change America and the economy that we have. So we really work to have an open environment with the organization, and that includes answering, the meaner messages on Instagram that I get. And I had a conversation this week with a communist, and I heard him out and I heard his side, and of course we definitely disagreed, but it is interesting to hear their perspective, and the only way we can work towards a better future is to understand where the other side is coming from.
Absolutely. And I feel like you and I have kind of come to a lot of the same conclusions that I don't know how old you are, but I assume you're probably somewhere around my age. And it's
I'm 23.
Oh wow, okay. So I'm 31. So I'm a little older than you, but but it seems
it's fine.
Go ahead.
That's politics, though, is you never really know somebody's background, and it's interesting to learn more about people on an individual level.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And I think you can probably attest to this, that we kind of grew up, I think, in a when you go from this stage when you're not political at all, like you're a kid, you're just having fun, the world is great, and you kind of don't know about politics. And then when you start getting a little bit political, you're immediately driven, even if you're watching like Fox News, it's like the way you're taught it kind of unconsciously is that, hey, there's one side that's evil and they're your enemy and this and that, and all their ideas are wrong and they're bad people. And then all of a sudden, if your friend goes the other way, it's like, wait a minute, I have to fight my friend now for why? Because he has bad ideas? What? But he's a good person. Like, it doesn't make sense, but you want to kind of stand up for your own beliefs, and you kind of get into this mess of like, well, wait a minute, this is my friend, but he's my enemy.
Yeah, I agree. And I was telling you before we started recording that we're trying to make a YAAS merch store, and we were playing around with little slogans, and one was like, friends don't let friends fall for the lies of socialism. And so I think a lot of the vitriol, especially for me, the team, and I know this very well, I always say I'm fighting the commies, and I think that's very much the case because they are the true radicals. And there's a difference between being somebody who wants a social democracy like Nordic Europe and somebody who actually wants to seize the means of production and have collective or governmental ownership of major industries in the country. And so that's really a definitive point for us in this argument against socialism. And it's hard for me when I see there's a difference. Like I said, there's a difference between what people want in this country and what they understand socialism to be. But when somebody actually wants to structurally change the United States of America, when they are not arguing on a basis of classical liberalism, that's a direct threat to the future of the country. And so that's when I'm more aggressive in my arguing, and that's when I'll stand up more and say, what are you doing? But I would never go at somebody for just being a Democrat and for just wanting, higher taxes and more regulations. That's a different argument. It's a different debate to have. And that's something where I think I wish that the country had an easier time arguing on those issues, because that's just a simple debate on policy.
Absolutely.
Foundation of classical liberalism. Huge difference from an anarchy taking over in this country and turning into a socialist state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's my belief that really the only difference you see now is that communism, socialism is trying to rebrand itself by using things like, democratic socialism, which, to me, as far as I can tell, it just essentially says that, well, it's still socialism. It's still the control of the means of production in the hands of the collective, whether that be the people, like, every person, every citizen, or a government, which, I mean, ultimately it will be some kind of centralized authority. I mean, that's just the nature of man. But it seems their only difference really is that they want to usher it in via a vote as opposed to some kind of tyrannical, government. But the problem with that I see is that even if you get the vote in, even if you got convinced enough people to vote for socialism, you by necessity you're going to have government coercion to deal with the people that aren't going to go along with it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And oh boy, there's so much I could say. That's the problem. I read all the time, like every morning, and I read multiple books at the same time. And so then when I have simple questions like this, I just think of all my talking points. And sometimes you just need to sit down and have a simple conversation, like actual conversations.
Absolutely.
Very funny. But when it comes to this idea of branding, it's all about marketing. This is truly an argument and a fight of conservatives and classical liberals in America versus this amazing, brilliant marketing of modern day socialists. And what I talk about, I do a lot of speeches on campuses, and I do a lot of conference speeches as well. And they're not necessarily conferences for young people. They're actually conferences for older Americans to talk about how the socialists in modern day America are marketing to young Americans and what kind of changes we can bring to our communication style to actually effectively market pro-freedom, anti-socialist policies and values. And that's what I really love. It's my bread and butter. I'm always called a boomer, and it's because I get along with older people a lot better. I am very uncomfortable in young crowds, and people have actually asked me, they're like, is it uncomfortable for you when people come up and ask you to take pictures and stuff, because people have been starting to do that? It's actually better for me, because if they didn't come up to me after recognizing me, I wouldn't be talking to them. I'm so socially awkward that it's like it's the only way I would talk to a young person is if they would come up to me and ask to talk about socialism. So it's kind of like making me more of a social butterfly in a way. But I just really worry, because the socialists have been very successful at marketing themselves as these democratic socialists. And like you perfectly mentioned, this is, yes, they may democratically be elected into office, but the bottom line is that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I prefer conservative limited government, because I don't trust any human to have too much power. It's the same thing with monopolies and capitalist economies. I don't want somebody to have that kind of power over somebody else. And so that's why I love limited government. And even if you democratically elect a socialist, you're still putting them in a position of power with so much control over the economy and so much control over the people's lives. But in the name of the people, quote unquote, in the name of the people, collective ownership, it's still managed by pretty much one person or one very serious regime. And that allows too much power under one authority. And that's what leads from that social democracy or that democratic socialism to transform into a dictatorship in a matter of decades, like we saw in Venezuela. And so that's why I think it's sweet. And what I talk about a lot is that young people have great intentions. They like the idea of democratic socialism because why not? It sounds great, right? It sounds like a great idea. But the bottom line is, throughout history, whenever somebody has too much power, people suffer from it. And I'm reading a great book now, and I'd love to get into this maybe, about what socialism really is. It's legalized looting. And just because it's legal under the law doesn't really make it moral, doesn't really make it a noble purpose or a noble cause. And so that's something that we need to talk about just as a conservative movement, is how do we fight back against the very successful messaging and marketing of democratic socialism in modern day America.
Yeah, I admire you so much for taking that on, because I think that hasn't even been addressed by really anyone in my lifetime. It seems that a lot of Republicans, whether national or at the local level, have kind of abandoned this idea of trying to appeal to young people. Whereas the Democrats have they jump right in. It's just, no problems. And I think fundamentally it's harder for us because you're dealing with the population, young people. They're more passionate. They're more feelings based. They're not going to be as well read as someone with experience and someone who's wise and kind of has experienced life really. What have you found to be, or I guess, if you're still exploring, you can let me know, but what have you found to be the most effective way to reach young people when it's kind of not within their realm. I mean, a lot of, like I said, a lot of kids are kind of more feelings based, but like, how do you bridge that gap to get them onto the conservative capitalism constitutional side of the argument?
Yeah. And that's a big question there again. But I could take this in two ways. One of the ways is why I started Young Americans Against Socialism. In 2018-ish, I started speaking out a little bit more, like late 2018 when AOC was about to be elected and stuff like that. I was speaking out more about socialism. And I swear to God, when I was talking about the threat of socialism, I felt a little conspiracy theorist like. I felt like, this is a little too extreme of me. Like, is socialism really a threat? Am I overdoing this? Is it silly? I can't believe I'm talking about socialism in America. It felt that crazy, but the Overton window is really shifted on this in the last 2 years especially, and so I'm glad that I started YAAS 1 year ago. We launched in August 2019, and it's because I saw a poll that said 58% of young Americans would choose socialism for the future of the country. And so that really got me thinking. And to answer your question, what I believe would really win over young people who do want justice, they want a more moral society, a more fair society, more equal society. That's what socialists promise. And they really do pull that emotional ploy by acting like they are taking the moral high ground by advocating for socialism. And so I thought, why are conservatives losing this? Especially when you have situations like Cuba, where Fidel Castro came to power promising social justice. He promised to bring more freedom. He promised democratic elections. That never happened. He said, we would have our first free election within 18 months of me coming to power. Never happened. He did some really terrible things that I won't really get into now because it's not really what we're talking about. But the problem is he marketed in a very successful way. He came to power. Those things never came to fruition. And it was pretty much because he promised these really fluffy utopian lifestyle changes for the country. And so what I thought of is, like, if 2 million people got on rafts and risked their lives to leave socialist turned communist Cuba, how come conservatives are losing the emotional argument against socialism? And I realized the left has to lie in every single situation where they try and make an argument for socialism. They have to deny basic history, reject basic economics. They distort the history. They do a lot of things to reject the fact that socialism has failed every time. So how do you combat that? How do you both bring emotion to the situation, and how do you combat the outright lies and denial of basic history and truth from the left? And I really do believe the only way to do that in the most effective way, especially, is with firsthand testimony, the undeniable truth of firsthand testimony, because it provides the emotion of the struggle that people went through to get to a free land like the United States of America after suffering under socialism. And then it also provides the testimony for what it's like to live day to day. A lot of people say that young Americans support socialism because we've never felt it firsthand. We hadn't had that Red Scare. We haven't experienced it in fighting socialists or communists in a war. We haven't felt it on our own. And so the only way we can really fix that, we can't ship them off to Venezuela like a lot of older people say. They say, let's send all the millennials to Venezuela and then they'll learn. We can't really do that. But what we do have is thousands and thousands of young people who have just escaped Venezuela. You have people who are first-generation Americans with people in their family who escaped Cuba. You have people who still have family members who fled the USSR. There are amazing stories of people who went through trials and tribulations to make it to the land of the free. And I think those are very marketable and very great for the movement in favor of freedom and in terms of marketing and communicating how special and how rare freedom really is. So that's something that I want to focus on, and that's that one pillar of for your question of how to market these ideas. But the second one I'd say is results-oriented messaging. When it comes to proposing policy. And so we can get into this, it's kind of a separate topic, but there's 3 topics that the left really dominate in terms of marketing socialism to our generation, and that's with climate change, the student loan crisis, and healthcare. And I talk about this a lot, especially in my speeches, but when it comes to marketing our ideas, we barely even talk about these things. And when we leave this void, when we don't talk about these issues, it creates a vacuum that the left fills up very quickly and very easily with these utopian promises, these fill-in-the-blank-for-all policies. And so it really does to our generation, it seems like conservatives don't care because we don't talk about it. And the left not only says these conservatives don't care, but they also say we are immoral because we don't have policy proposals and we don't support their ideas. And so when it comes to situations like healthcare, a great example is, we want to reduce the cost of healthcare. We want to increase access to healthcare. And we want to do that with transparency and pricing. And we want to do that by increasing competition in the healthcare industry. What the results of that would be, though, is what we need to focus on. That would increase access to affordable healthcare because everybody, every human, every American deserves access to affordable healthcare. I think that's the kind of language we need to be using when we market our policies to young people. I really do think that is going to be a successful tactic for us moving forward.
Wow, so much good stuff there.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of rambled there.
No, I can break it down. I got notes. So you had mentioned and this is, I guess, one of the main things you guys do at YAAS, is you find these people who have survived and escaped socialism, and you give them kind of a platform to tell their story. I've seen some of these videos; they're absolutely outstanding. What one is the most? Oh, you're welcome. What one is the most memorable to you of all the ones you like? Well, first of all, how many have you done? I've only seen a few of them, but how many have you done? And what is the one that kind of stood out to you the most?
Oh boy. Well, we've done about a dozen so far. We've started doing like one a month, and then now we're trying to amp it up to 2 a month, but it's a little difficult with COVID and traveling with everything, because we try and go and visit them in their city and make it as easy as possible, because these are not people in the videos, like you've seen, they're not people that naturally talk about themselves or get in front of a camera and are in it for the vanity of it, or in it for the follows or anything like that. Even though we do millions of views on the videos, these are people that we have to make them feel very comfortable and have to make them understand how important it is that they share their story, and how much of an impact young Americans would feel if they heard the testimony of the experience they went through under socialism, how important it is for them to pass those lessons down to young Americans. And so, like I said, it's not natural for them to have to get in front of a camera and talk about it. And so we try and make them feel very comfortable. We try and make it feel very friendly. And on top of that, studies show, and this is why we started the organization with these testimonies, studies show that 90% of young Americans have a social media account. They spend 5 hours a day on social media, scrolling through, watching video content, consuming other forms of content. And then on top of that, studies also show that peer-to-peer casual communication is the best way to change a young person's mind, or at least get them to be open to changing their mind. And so that's why these testimonies have, I think, been doing so well, is we don't overproduce them. We keep them very casual, and that's when they go viral. We're trying to create key insights of what really makes the video most successful. And our most successful one, I'm sure you've seen this one, was Ray Armas from Cuba. And so he actually didn't even want to do a script. Sometimes we offer a script if they feel more comfortable, if they don't want to just talk from the heart. But this guy, he said, don't give me a script, ask me questions, and I will talk right into the camera. And he talks about how he had long hair when he was a teenager in Cuba, and he was beaten by the police because it reminded them of the evil Americans, like rock and roll teenage rebellion style, very American. He listened to the Beatles, and he was beaten by police for the same reason, because it reminded the Castro regime, rock and roll did of the American lifestyle, and that's not okay. So he was beaten by police for that too. He talks about how they ate potatoes for months in his family, and to boil the potatoes, his mom broke down their furniture to boil the water to cook the potatoes that they would eat for months. And so it was some really crazy stuff. And one of the more impactful things he talks about is how when the USSR fell in Cuba, they were so brainwashed that he was 10 years old, the USSR fell, and he went home that day and he said, if the evil Americans come to Cuba now, I will kill myself. And so he looks in the camera and he says, that is socialism for you. And so it's just really powerful to hear that kind of stuff. We've never experienced anything like that in America. Young Americans have had a very cushy lifestyles. Maybe some of us have grown up in poverty. Some of us have grown up in lower income families. We all have our trials and tribulations. But to have a story like you being so convinced and brainwashed by your socialist communist government that you will kill yourself because the USSR fell and the evil Americans might come, that is insane. And one of the more important things that he talks about before he gets to the main message of how he windsurfed across the ocean from Cuba to the Florida Keys to become a refugee in America, and now he serves in the U.S. military, he talks about how parents in Cuba, it's almost very 1984-ish. I don't know if you've read that book by Orwell, but people are reporting their own families to big government to report them for being, anti-revolutionary or against big government. And that was a worry in Cuba. He talks about how parents couldn't have the conversations with their children about how bad the situation was and the fact that they lived in a communist dictatorship, the fact that they were going to be brainwashed at school. They couldn't have these conversations with them yet because they couldn't trust their own kids to not say anything in school.
Yep, absolutely.
Because if you said something in school, you're going to have the police come and you're probably going to end up dead, because that's what they do in Cuba. They kill political opponents and political rivals. So that's the kind of story that we focus on, the more day-to-day, what it was like growing up in a communist or socialist country. And it really does well. Ray's video got 10 million views the first time we posted it, and then we reposted it in May, and it's already at over 1 million views again. It just has the emotion and the power to go naturally viral. But we also focus more on social influencing, because we want to get on the screens of apolitical young Americans, especially on Instagram and pages like that. So it's been very exciting so far. And I'll do one more video that we did real quick. We also do things, we always want to have lessons in the videos. And so one of the ones we did was Giancarlo Sopo, who's a first-generation Cuban American. He had a family member who was killed in the Che Guevara prison camp, pretty much by a firing squad is what's assumed, but they said that he fell off of a building. And that he wasn't killed by the police. And so he talks about how he grew up in America thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to be a Democrat. I'm going to be a lefty because they're the ones who support the working class. They support the immigrants. And then he completely changed after he campaigned for Obama. He campaigned for Hillary Clinton. He believed in those people. And then he turned around and became an independent the minute he saw Nancy Pelosi and the left embrace AOC and the Justice Democrats, the DSA, and the people who are embracing the same ideology that ruined his home country. And so that was a really powerful lesson. And we hope to find more people who were like that, who did fall for the lies of the left in the beginning and are now coming to a realization, not necessarily a red pill, but more so just coming to the realization of these people aren't even advocating for classical liberalism.
Yeah, I mean, again, so much good stuff there. It's so interesting that you talk about, or that you're finding these people and interviewing them. I have an acquaintance of mine who I got to work with for a while, who he grew up in Ukraine, and he remembers as a very young child, probably even like in elementary school, the Soviet tanks going down his street, and the communists essentially taking over his little town, and them trying to essentially trying to indoctrinate them. And the kids kind of like went along with it, but secretly they were kind of just like, what is happening? This is so strange. And like, so when I would talk to him about it a little bit, and again, like you said, like he's kind of reluctant to talk about it. And I don't know if that's something that you find at all like that, but I found the same, it was the same way with him. But he kind of like, anytime I would bring it up, he would kind of scoff at me a little bit and just kind of, in a way, to kind of suggest like, kid, you don't even know what socialism is. Like, you don't even know what communism is. Like, you talk about it, but like, you don't understand what it really was. And, and I guess like, especially with the Russian communism, which I think was probably one of the darker forms and probably the most documented form of communism that we have today. At least, the atrocities committed by them. But you also had mentioned kind of that we don't really have on the right here kind of answers to major issues like climate change. You mentioned student debts. And it's so funny because I think we do have good ideas there. It's just that no one's really promoting them. No one's really I guess to some degree, no one's really engaging with people like in the way that you are. Like, I can tell you, for example, with climate change specifically, I just had on, I don't know if you're familiar with their work, the ACC, the American Conservation Coalition.
Oh, yes. We've done some videos together.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I just had Carly Matthews. I think she's a representative for them in D.C.
Yeah,
and we had
absolutely.
a great
It's kind of funny. We've done a couple... We've done some op-eds together, too, and so it'll be like me, Carly, and Danny. I don't know if you know Danny. We'll be like collaborating on a Google Doc, trying to come up with the best things, because it's true. Climate change is really the Trojan horse that the left is using to implement socialism. And so it's really important that we talk about these things. And what's frustrating for me, especially as like a country girl, I live in a very, very spacious county. I mean, we have more cows in our county than people, and I live on top of a mountain. And the fact that you have leftists in cities, I understand that, lifestyles are different, but you have leftists in cities acting like they're the only ones that care about the environment. I mean, like, my dad's birthday was a few months ago, and I bought him an apple tree because we have an orchard and we grow plants and we grow our own food and we work the land and we hunt the land and we take care of the land. And I love the environment, and I absolutely hate that we are losing the conversation around efficient and effective energy use and the fact that we even care about the environment. That's what really hurts so bad, is because conservatives, I know there's some Democrat and liberal farmers out there, but conservatives are often the ones who are living in remote areas, who are taking care of the land, working the land, and respecting the land. And so that's what's really frustrating for me, and especially because it's the number one issue that the left is using to implement their radical policies. On top of that, when it comes to energy, and this is why I love ACC, it's a conservative mentality to want to efficiently and effectively use energy resources and find the most efficient and effective way to use energy. And I don't know why we don't continue to talk on that and not seize the opportunity, but more so grab the opportunity that's there and run with it, because it's a winning issue for us, just like many things, whether that's social justice reform and many other topics that right now the left is monopolizing.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but highlighting the left's positions on, well, the more radical positions, like, getting rid of energy entirely, kind of getting rid of the oil industry without replacing it with something that is, it's equal in output. Essentially some of these more radical groups want to bring us back to the Stone Age. And I find even the most left-leaning people, they use a lot of energy, probably more energy than I use on a daily basis. It's kind of taking for granted, like the, electricity, refrigeration, internet, Wi-Fi, all these things. And all these things are, like you said, we want everyone to have these things, but we believe in the efficient use of resources. I kind of want to shift gears a little bit into the conversations that we're having about socialism, and kind of what I want to get your thoughts on what I see to be probably the biggest obstacle in having those honest conversations. And that's the idea between good intentions and good ideas. And what I've found in my experience is that when you're debating with socialists about their ideas and everything, when you criticize the idea, they take it personally, and they just take the criticism as if you're saying to them, no, you're a bad person. Like socialism, like if you want universal health care, that leads to rationing, which leads to a misallocation of resources, and more people die, and then you end up with no healthcare at all. And you can say that to them, and when in their own minds, they're thinking, wow, this person's attacking me. They think that I'm a bad person. But I know in my heart, no, I'm a good person. I have good intentions. That's why I believe these things. So this person's clearly lying. And if they're lying, then this person, he must be the evil person. He must be dishonest. He has a hidden agenda. He's, putting all these things onto me that, he's the liar, essentially. And I think that leads then people to condemn us and, even incite violence against us, which is what we're seeing now. It's this effort to dehumanize one side of the aisle. And you see this manifest with the false claims of racism, Nazism, all these things. Kind of what is how accurate do you think that is in your experience?
No, I think it's very accurate, and you really hit the nail on the head there, where, and I think I mentioned this a little bit before, where, yes, 70% of young Americans currently claim they would vote for socialists. Now, do I think 70% of young Americans want to seize the means of production or want to nationalize major industries? No, and I don't think 70% of young Americans even know what that means. And I really do think that what's going on right now is there is this small group of radicals that is, for some reason, very successfully dominating the conversation. And they are the ones who want to seize the means of production. They do carry the hammer and sickle signs. They do want to change this country from the inside out, and they do have bad intentions. But if we're trying to really make moves and change hearts and minds, is the way to do that lumping in the clueless, useful idiots that are in our generation who are being used right now, lied to in a very embarrassing way? Or should we really make the definitive line of who's our real enemy here? And do we want to keep pushing these people into the loving arms of people like Bernie Sanders and AOC and the Antifa radicals? Because that's what's going to happen if we keep treating them as one similar group. And so I think a needed conversation needs to be had about How do you win young people over who do have really great intentions for this country and just are being completely misled? And how do you also hold the people accountable who do want to topple statues because they don't like American values, who want to redo the Constitution, who want to structurally change America? There's a big difference. And it reminds me of a story. I don't know if you've ever heard one of my speeches about this, but in college, I went to American University, and I walked into my roommate's room because I moved into a house off campus my last year, and I knew some of the girls that were in the house, but I didn't know some of the others. And so I went and introduced myself in all their rooms, and this one girl, she was so nice, we're getting along, and we're really hitting it off. And I look on her wall, and there's a poster of Mao Zedong, Lenin, Stalin, Karl Marx, and Fidel Castro. And I'm like, ooh, and you know, some people hear me do this, like hear me say this speech, and they're like, oh, Morgan, it was a joke poster. And I'm like, clearly you didn't watch the whole video, because when I asked her what it was, I was like, hey, you know, what is this? Because I've really only seen those men who are responsible for the deaths of hundreds of million people at this point. I've really only seen those men in like black and white pictures in a textbook or in a history documentary in class. And so to see them on a poster on my college roommate's wall was just wild. And she looked at me with the biggest smile on her face, and she said, oh, I'm a communist. and she's a rare one. I mean, you don't have young Americans around the country calling themselves communists. She's in a very small, minute group. But the problem is, I would talk to her, and I would say, you know, why do you feel this way? You have mass murderers and dictators on your wall. And then she would tell me, she said, well, you know, conservatives are mean because you don't put taxpayer dollars and government action or force behind the things you say you care about. So do you really care about them? You're lying. And I thought that was a really great and eye-opening experience for me, because it really does show that conservatives are suffering from a messaging problem, because we have the same values as young Americans. We want a free, fair, just, moral society. And for some reason, young Americans like my roommate think that we don't, because they see caring about an issue as putting taxpayer dollars or government force behind it. Government is the only answer for them when it comes to finding a solution. And so we have to get to the root of the problem, where we're losing young Americans from a very early age, and having that group split between young Americans who are being lied to and the evil actual radicals that are a very small handful of people that are right now dominating the conversation. That needs to happen very quickly, or we're going to continue to lose young people who will keep hating us because we're calling them evil and we're calling them the commies who are trying to take over the country.
Yeah, you know, I've heard that story a couple of times. I think you talk about it a lot when you do your speeches, it's a great story, because it really puts in perspective the life that at least I've lived, in that, well, not that I have like a ton of communist friends, but like, you know, this idea that, well, if you're a communist or if you're a Democrat, you must be some kind of evil person that needs to be destroyed or something. And it's like, wait a minute, no, this is my buddy. But I wanted to ask you about your friend there. I get the idea that, okay, well, Republicans, and I mean, all the people that I listen to and respect and have taught me a lot throughout the years, they are all very critical of Republicans, because it's very easy to be very critical of Republicans because they do a lot of dumb stuff, and they don't stand up for their principles, and the list goes on and on and on. In a lot of ways, they're no better than the Democrats today.
I just feel like we're always talking about holding the line. It's like, I'm sick of holding the line. Why are we not on the offensive?
Yes, exactly.
Why are we not pushing for our values and our solutions to problems instead of just calling AOC dumb? I'm sick of it.
Absolutely. And but I'm just wondering, what would, I get that Republicans suck, but like, why then go to such a far extreme? Like, why then respect, like you said, I mean, these mass murders, these dictators, people who were murdering gays and murdering Jews, and I mean, like, how does your friend justify that exactly? What is appealing about them to her or him?
Yeah, it was a her.
Yes.
It's a very serious issue, I would say, of many combination, or a combination of many factors. And right now, if you think of like the usual conversation, the left has they've just created this very succinct, normal, and expected conversation, this knee-jerk reaction. And I actually went to the University of Illinois, Chicago with a camera just to like prove, because I was giving these presentations and I really didn't understand that people had no idea how clueless young Americans really are. And not, I don't mean to I'm not calling them like dumb clueless or bad clueless. I just mean like ignorant on the issue, truly have no idea what we are talking about. And so I went on the campus. I just asked people straight up. I was like, hey, would you choose socialism or capitalism? And every single one of them in 1 hour was like, oh yeah, socialism, because it's like, it's just like, it's so nice. And I feel like when we all come together on our issues and we talk about them, I feel like we'll be better for it. That was the kind of answer I would get. And I just wanted to be like, oh, you mean like a legislature? You mean like a republic? It's like, we have a really great system of government in place. And yes, justice can be slow. I mean, it really sucks sometimes. But what was frustrating for us, what happened with my roommate is I asked her, can I ask you one question? Like, what about Venezuela? It's a very clear example of seizing the means of production, democratically electing a socialist candidate who was put into office. He implemented socialist policies after he promised to do so, and the country became a dictatorship in a matter of decades. What do you say to that? And her response was, ugh, you guys love to bring that one up. And so then once you talk about that, they usually say something like, I want us to be like Denmark or Sweden, like Bernie promises. Okay, well, Denmark is a capitalist country, and they have high taxes and a lot of regulations, but at the end of the day, they rely on the wealth created from capitalism to pay for those things. And so I really do think the left is messaging in a very strange way, and this is why it's so hard to fight against, is because at the same time as they're promising young Americans that we'll end up like Denmark, capitalist Denmark, by getting rid of capitalism, they're also putting on their website that they want collective ownership and governmental ownership of private business. So how do you fight back against a side that is outright delusional and very manipulative with their messaging? I mean, Bernie Sanders finally got confronted for this on Fox News. I mean, it took forever. All this would have been squashed very quickly if Bernie Sanders was confronted just multiple times over and over again about why do you keep saying you want to seize the means of production, but you still think that we're going to end up like a capitalist country? Why do you keep denying this? Instead, it took months. It took years for this to happen. And he finally got asked. And his answer, I kid you not, is, well, I'm not an expert on the economics of Finland. It's like, how do you form an argument with a side that is outright denying basic fact and outright denying every point that you make? With Venezuela, all they say is that U.S. sanctions are the reason that the socialist country failed. So it's something that we struggle with every day. The YAAS team talks about it all the time. We talk in our group chat every week. We have weekly phone calls about how can we fight back against this when the left has trained our generation to have these knee-jerk reactions to every single thing, whether they want to talk about, oh no, we're Denmark, or oh no, it was U.S. sanctions, or oh no, it's never been tried before, or oh no, it's democratic socialism. They have these immediate answers that they've been trained to give. And so it's really hard, but something has to be the tip of the spear to break through that wall. And I think the tip of the spear is the firsthand testimonies that really break any idea of what socialism is in half.
Yeah, excellent. Awesome stuff. I want to shift gears again here. We've been talking a lot about socialism, about, the conversation itself. If you could pick maybe one, or, the top two things, the number two flaws or problems with the ideas of socialism, what do you think they would be? Like, with the ideology itself, what are its fundamental problems, by your estimation?
Oh my gosh!
If you want, I could start.
You could. Oh no! I think one of the biggest issues with this is the concept of forced wealth redistribution. The idea that wealth isn't created; that it's more of just a static thing that needs to be redistributed by force. And something that I mentioned earlier was the idea of the student loan debt crisis, where you have hundreds of thousands, millions of young Americans with student loan debt out the wazoo, like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they pay the same amount in rent as they're paying in student loan debt every month, and they feel hopeless about it. And so you have Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and they go, you know what? It's just not fair that that's the case. And when there's millionaires and billionaires out there in the world, they have the kind of money that would fix this problem. So put me in office, give me power, and I will use my power to take what they have and give it to you because that's what's fair. And so they're using the student loan crisis to train our generation to support that really radical and unnatural idea that it's okay to take what somebody else has if it's for a moral purpose. And that's really the issue of socialism, is they really do think in this situation, it's okay if I take what somebody else has or what somebody else earned because it's for a moral purpose. And socialism is really just legalized theft. It's legalized looting. And you couldn't go and steal from somebody's refrigerator. And this is, I'm trying to remember what book I got this from. I think it's from Cuba by Juan Clark. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how in a normal situation, you wouldn't want to steal something from your neighbor's refrigerator. You wouldn't want to take something from your neighbor's house just naturally. That's not something that you do. And so what the left has to do, what socialists do, is they create the mentality that it's not fair or that it's immoral that your neighbor has X, Y, or Z in their refrigerator or in their house. So that the average people who usually wouldn't want to take something from someone else, they start to feel justified to do that. And so it's a terrible mentality. It's a terrible philosophy to carry on. And I think Winston Churchill said it best when he said that it's all about greed, and it's about jealousy, and it's about failure. That's what socialism is. And so it's a very sick mentality to take on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think to piggyback off what you were saying, because I gave it some thought myself the last couple of days, and really from that interview I did with the socialist, I find that the two fundamental flaws, if I had to pick, would be that one, they're too abstract. They have nothing written on paper. They have no explanation beyond just their ideas and intentions. It's just in a total realm of abstraction. And the problem with that is that you can't criticize an idea. How am I going to criticize someone who, hey, I want every person to have decent health care? How can I even attack that? I agree with that. And like you said, this idea of wealth redistribution for the purposes of moral good. And the problem is, well, who gets to define what the moral good is? If you're going to say some government bureaucracy is going to do that, or some, whatever definition I would come up with, people probably would disagree and not think it's sufficient. And might say, oh, well, it leaves out this or that. So that's the other problem, is that they can't, nothing's written down, there's no definitions. But the number one thing would be that they just assume that people can be molded by coercion, as opposed to the enlightened position that people pursue their own self-interests. And to me, it's that idea of coercion, that, well, we can just mold people if only people will just do what I want them to do, and if we can just organize them this way, I can make this utopia. And, the smartest people of all time have tried to figure this out. And, even Plato's Republic is a great example, or even he at least had the fortitude to admit that, listen, you can't make a utopia in this world. People are there's just this thing called human nature and the human condition, that people are not subservient to other people. They have their own free wills and desires and self-interests that they pursue. And so you have kind of the Enlightenment thinkers come in, and they say, well, instead of manipulating mankind, let's try to understand mankind and use their strengths to our advantages, but also understand our weaknesses, and who knows, maybe leverage them to give us advantages as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you touched on that, because it reminded me, I think it was in the same book, actually, that same one of Castro's Revolution by Juan Clark. He talks about how socialists and central planners, they have this idealistic view that people are just like plants in their garden, and that they can create any garden they want with just a little planning and putting it to paper. And you can't transfer those utopian ideas into reality. It just does not happen without force. And so that concept, and that's really my biggest, I probably should have said this earlier, my biggest worry about socialism or any large government action is that you have to implement it with force. It's just not going to happen. People are not going to dedicate their lives to building a small business when it's going to be taken over by a large government. And so something that really worries me, if you go onto the Democratic Socialists of America website, these are the same people that act like they're going to end up like Denmark and that they're democratic socialists, not real socialists. And socialists like them have never tried this before. So the usual talking points. If you read their website, it is so creepy. They talk about how they do want to get rid of private business. They do want to get this forced to be collectively owned and have governmental ownership. But of course, call it collective ownership in the name of the people, like every other socialist has done before in history. And what they talk about is that they literally say this on their website. They say, we don't have a plan on how to make this happen yet, but until we find a long-term plan for the short run, we're just going to work on increasing taxes and increasing the number of regulations so that we can gain control over these private businesses. That's disgusting. And so that's really, it makes it harder for you and me and people who believe in limited government and classical liberalism, because then how do we know if these Democrats who want to raise taxes and regulations are doing it for this long-term goal of gaining control of these businesses, or do they just really believe in being regular Democrats? It makes it very difficult for us. And I think on the website they say that they don't have a long-term plan because they aren't willing to admit, or they don't want to admit, that these kind of plans, these top-down kind of things, they require force, and force gets ugly, as we've seen in Chaz or Chop or whatever it's called.
Just going to say
it gets ugly within a matter of weeks. And so it's just the hard truth that these utopian socialists that we have in America these days, they're so fluffy and they're so soft and beta that they don't want to admit what they're going to have to do to implement these ideas. They also hate the police, but they're going to need a police state to implement those same policies. So none of it makes sense. And it's very frustrating to be the founder of Young Americans Against Socialism when you're dealing with an opponent as confusing and as secretive and as manipulating as this.
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned the police state. It's like, in communism, the state is supposed to, quote unquote, wither away. But then again, I mean, but then you need like the despotic state to enforce all the rules. You need to continuously pound people into submission under these systems. So it's like, how are you going to have a withering state when you need, essentially a police state, like you suggest? It's so funny. Just really.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is coming out of this Chaz stuff, like something that's happened in every socialist movement. You have these groups, and so the Bolsheviks, you have the Chavistas, you have the Collectivo. You have the people who supported Castro in Cuba, and now you have Antifa. And I have always said this, that Antifa is like the modern-day Bolsheviks. But what's interesting is we have never before been able to see the internal power struggle of an uprise of a socialist movement, the way Chaz or Antifa have been trying out in Seattle. And now we have literal selfie videos of what's going on inside of this autonomous zone. And so it was so interesting. There was these people that were vandalizing a business, and you see that the new CHOP leaders were going up to them and saying, please don't do that. These are businesses that we now have to protect. Like, these are in our zone, and we shouldn't be doing this now. And the guy's like, whatever, like, F the police. They can't tell me what to do. And then the other side is like, no, now we're the police. Now we have to police the area. We're the police now. And so it's just fascinating to see the power struggle break down in a matter of days. And of course, I don't know if you saw this too, they've started requesting that people send pizzas in and Postmates meals into the autonomous zone from the capitalist outside economy. Guess what? If you do that to the whole country, there's nowhere to Postmates or order a pizza from.
So funny. Yeah, I think actually I just read today that I guess they're shutting down the Chaz shop. I guess they were so successful that they got their point across. They made their they got whatever they wanted, I guess, or something, and so they're shutting it down now, and they're encouraging everyone to not only are they encouraging everyone to kind of leave the zone and return to normal life, also vote for Joe Biden and whoever the local leader is of that city, because I was just dying this morning reading that. But, I'm just reflecting on the conversation we've had so far, and it reminds me for some reason, or what comes to memory, is Jordan Peterson talking about how we kind of have this, these characteristics, and liberals tend to score higher on openness, and conservatives tend to score higher in orderliness. And he makes the case that, listen, we need each other. We need the liberals to come and create things and create businesses and, do all these, bring things out of abstraction into reality. But we need the conservatives to run them and essentially make them efficient and to make them, long lasting. And I'm just thinking about all the things that we've been talking about. And, I don't want liberals to be like less open or less kind of, abstract. I want them to do that. But I just want them to have some kind of limitation or some kind of recognition that they have the capacity to be wrong about stuff. Almost like as if like in my own life, I have a self-assessment process where I determine, hey, like, here's one of the ideas I have. What are the flaws of that idea? What would be my opposition to that idea? This and that. What I would want more than anything is the opposition just to kind of critically analyze themselves, like I do, and like I think that's why I think people on the right, especially our age, are starting to do that now, and that's why we're coming up with better arguments, sharper ideas, and better responses to what they're coming out with.
Yeah. Well, and I think you touched on an interesting point. The left is so creative, so entrepreneurial in many ways, and so innovative that they are flourishing in a capitalist economy.
Absolutely.
And one of my favorite points to talk about, Ariana Grande has like a song, and she's like $100 million. I think she's worth $100 million. She endorsed Bernie Sanders. She loves the kind of leftist policies that they promote. But at the same time, she's worth $100 million. And she has a song, I kid you not, called Monopoly. And it talks about treat my goals like property, collect it like Monopoly. I won't come if there's not a fee. Go into the bank to make my investments. I'm going to give you my debit pin, and you're going to be all living large because I give you my card number. It's like so many values of being a capitalist. And it was really frustrating for me because how do we reach these people? Clearly young people have capitalist, creative, and dream-chasing values that are deep down very American, but for some reason they don't like America and they feel like they're being oppressed here. And something that's really important for us to focus on as well is the idea that capitalism and our system, America, is based on a system of capitalism where you have private property and you have private business and you respect those rights. And then those rights are protected by a system of public policy and a system of justice. And so you can't have one without the other. You can't be safe and feel safe enough to participate in the capitalist economy unless you have law and order in society, where you know that if you need the police, if somebody's looting your business, if your business is about to be burned to the ground, you can call on the place where you pay taxes to, and the police and the fire department will show up and protect you. When the government is asking you to pay into the system and pay into them and as a taxpayer, and in return they will protect you and provide you the security so that you can continue to operate safely in society, and they don't do that the way they've done it during these riots, it really causes some hesitation for people to want to participate in society the way they did. I mean, I'll tell you what, I got a ticket last week for going 69 in a 55, and it hurt. It hurt because I try so hard to be such a good person in society, and I'm seeing these people riot, 10, 12,000 people rioting for Black trans lives when we have a pandemic, and when everybody, 100,000 small businesses went out of business because of this pandemic mess, and people's loved ones are dying alone, and you can't go to funerals, people cancel their weddings. Serious stuff has happened this year, and then you have people rioting and looting and receiving no repercussions. On top of that, they want to get rid of the national anthem. They're taking down these statues. And then it really sucks to get pulled over for going 69 and 55 on a country road and have to pay the ticket. It makes it hard for respectable tax-paying people to want to keep being these happy tax-paying citizens when we're seeing what's going on in the news. And so I really do think our society flourishes on that idea of private property, private business that's protected by a system of justice and public policy. And we need to make sure we're protecting that, or else people like us, people like you and me, who just want to be left alone and want a free and fair society, we're going to start feeling a little hurt by what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned this idea of paying taxes, which is so funny because when you think about it, they always talk about how, like your roommate, who said that, listen, that you don't put money into things that you believe in, this and that. And what's really interesting about that is there are states right now that don't have any income taxes and yet have tons of cities and have probably tons of Democrats and liberals and socialists and communists living in them. How much money do they give the government every year just of their own fruition? How many people, if we got rid of taxes tomorrow, would willingly donate large portions of their income to the government because they actually believe in that? I'd wager that probably almost none would do that. But it's only this idea that, only if it's forced and if everyone does it, then will I do it. There's no real conviction of those ideas that they have unless other people are doing it, unless government forces everyone to do it. So for me, that it just shows that it's not, there's something about it. It's not that it's not real, but there's something else insidious about that. Because if you really believe the government needed all this money and the government was this great force for good, I think you would be donating to it like you would a cancer charity or, any one of the other charities that we have. What do you think about that?
I would agree. And I think that goes back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of the messaging. Right now, conservatives get so convoluted and so deep in the weeds of like talking about healthcare policy when the left is just like, hey, everybody deserves healthcare. Everybody has a right to healthcare. AOC wants, I don't know if you've seen the Just Society, AOC's like second big piece of legislation that kind of missed the news cycle when it came out. You should definitely read it because it's wild. I think it might be 6 or 7 pieces of legislation that she proposes, and then one kind of like proposal to sign this UN treaty where it declares healthcare a right. So they just talk in very simple, basic terms, while conservatives really struggle to do that. So that's why people like my roommate, they really aren't paying attention to what the GOP is saying about healthcare, even though with our healthcare proposals, we do want to increase access to healthcare. We do want to lower the cost of healthcare. And we do just think that everybody deserves access to that kind of thing. And so that's what's really frustrating for me. And I think that talking about those issues more will fill that void and show young Americans that we care. Because right now we're just on the defensive all the time, trying to prevent us from being called racist or sexist or whatever word they're going to come up with these days. I mean, I'm a woman. I'm 23. I run my own nonprofit organization, and I'm still told by the tolerant far left that I am sexist, racist, I lack basic human decency, and that I'm actually just a puppet run by a bunch of old men. If there are any old men out here who do want to donate $1 million to YAAS, please let me know. Please help me out. I need some help. I need some money. And that's what I say all the time. I'm like, listen, if you know a $1 billion donor, send them my way. I would take it because I believe in this cause. And I believe that people from all backgrounds, all wealth statuses would support young Americans against socialism. Whether you're a billionaire or you're somebody who's in the working class who just wants to live in America and be free, you could support YAAS. And so I really do think that the conservatives are suffering because of messaging, and what you mentioned earlier really hit it on the head. And something, I don't know if you've seen this, maybe you've heard me talk about this in a speech or two, but Bernie Sanders has like a campaign video out about freedom. Have you seen that?
I don't think I have.
So
I can only imagine.
I can send you the link because it's just very interesting. It's like the perfect example of what the left is doing to market, and it has a great connection to like my roommate and why she would think the way she does about what taxes and what caring about an issue means. And so in The Road to Serfdom, Hayek talks a lot about socialists changing the meanings of basic words like justice, morality, freedom, fairness, feminism. They've done the same thing with feminism. And so I really saw that with this Bernie video. It's a bunch of young people. They get on the screen and it like flashes from one to the other. And they're like, am I free if I have student loan debt?
Oh, yeah.
Am I free if I have high health care? And so then like one of them's like, am I free if I lose my farm to big ag? Am I free if I only work? This is a great one. Am I free if I only work my dead end job to get healthcare insurance? And so it ends with going, no. You're not free. Freedom comes from economic freedom, and economic freedom comes from healthcare for all, school for all, jobs for all, blah, 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 blah for all. And then it talks about how that's democratic socialism, and that's the America that we need, and it's the more just America. And so they're changing what freedom means, and that's really what we're at right now. Is freedom the freedom to live your life and not be oppressed by a government, or is it freedom to not have the responsibility of taking care of yourself? Because life sucks sometimes. It's called the burden of being. And the left wants to completely reject it, while the conservatives, and what we should be saying, is that we want to fix these problems to the best ability that we can, because everybody deserves to live in a world where they can afford healthcare and where they can afford basic necessities and where they can have a job and take care of themselves and their family. And that goes back to that same issue of AOC thinks she like made fun of Trump for saying that he wants to liberate states and let people go back to work. And she was like, how about we don't go back to work? How about we don't? I have never heard of a situation of people being liberated by going back to work. It's called taking care of yourself and being able to pay your own bills and take care of yourself and your family. That's what it means to be free. And being able to live your own life without being dependent on a government. That's freedom. Having a job and being able to do that and take care of yourself, that is freedom. Not being dependent on anyone. And so they really have even changed just the basic definition of freedom.
Yeah, I mean, quite literally, it's the difference between freedom to things, which requires, someone else to provide that, which means that you're entitled to someone else's labors, as opposed to a freedom from coercion, a freedom from being commanded and controlled. And they're two different things, but they're, in a lot of ways, people use them interchangeably, or at least the left will use it one way and we kind of use it another way. But people who don't know that just hear freedom, and whatever side they hear first, that's kind of what they associate it with. I guess as a final question, I'll wrap this up here. I want to be respectful of your time. What has been the greatest success of the organization so far, and where do you see it going in the next 5 years?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. And we've had a lot of great success in physical ways in terms of the followers that we've gotten and the views. But what really matters to me is that we're promoting young voices that are like me. And so I'll be honest, I had like a full-time job in Boston when I started this, and I gave my 2 weeks at the job when this launched because it did so well. And, I got to go on Fox and Friends, and I did an interview with Glenn Beck, and we just got so much support. We got grassroots donors. We got so many views and follows, and it was really exciting because it was a great launch. But what matters to me is that we are giving that platform now to the young voices that need to be heard. And so what we've been developing for this entire time during COVID, we've been really hard at work reaching out to young people who have come from socialist countries to get them more involved in the organization. And we call it the Coalition. And so we're hoping to use the platform. We have over 300,000 followers at this point across all of our social media pages. We want to promote those voices, and so we're letting them be contributing writers. We're letting them do videos as contributors. We're using them to provide statements and video responses to current events, and we're hoping to just get their voices out there with the platform that we have. And so that's what I plan on developing over the next couple of years, because a lot of people, I got to speak at CPAC this year. It was so exciting. I've never been. And so it was my first time, and I got to be on the main stage, and I was very nervous, but I got to meet so many great young people, and one of them was Maria Fernanda Bello, and she's from Venezuela, and now she runs the Coalition. And so she's brought in, we have dozens of people from socialist countries that we all have this group chat, and we talk about what is our response to this, what is our tactic to fight back against this talking point, what are we going to do next. And we're just really exciting, and I feel very, I hate to say it, but I feel very inadequate in the group chat because everybody else has survived a socialist government and escaped and came to the land of the free. And I just started a little nonprofit. And so I really hope to just keep giving them this platform to promote their voices. And some of them are interested in becoming speakers at events. And so I'm going to definitely help them train because I do speaking all the time. I'm going to try and get them these opportunities and keep growing their voices because the left is dominating this conversation. And it's time that we start stepping it up. With some new communication styles. And I think peer-to-peer is definitely the future. So I'm pretty excited about it. And if anybody wants to join, if you have any listeners that want to join as a contributor, or if you want to just join the Coalition where it's more casual and, you can help share some tweets and participate in rapid response, you can go to fightsocialism.org and join us, watch our videos, and just join a part of the movement because we're pretty excited for the year ahead.
Awesome, Morgan. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great conversation. I had tons of fun talking with you. We'll definitely have to have you on again in the future, or maybe anyone else who wants to come on and maybe share a story or whatever.
Oh, I'm sure they would love that. And like I said, there's a lot of people where they're not nervous, but it's just more they haven't done this before. And they're seeing there's a lot of really great young guys from Venezuela, like Daniel DiMartino and Jose, I can't remember his last name, but they have been doing speaking tours, and they've been going to campuses, and they've been meeting with young people and sharing their stories. And I've had a lot of people that reach out to me and say, Morgan, I see what they do, and I think I could do the same. Can you help me? And so I'm just trying to get them opportunities to put their voices out there because they are voices that need to be heard. And so if you ever have any opportunities, or if anybody has them and maybe you're interested in hearing more firsthand testimonies at your event or at your conference, please let me know because we've got some really great future leaders that we're developing here. And I'm happy to always do it, but I really do want to help these people. So we're always happy to come and promote this message. So thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
The pleasure is all mine. We'll have you on again soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much.